The lantern flickered in the window of the remote ranch house like a beacon against the endless Texas darkness, and Caleb Thornton had kept it burning for 347 nights, though he had stopped counting after the first 100. The year was 1878, and the sprawling cattle country outside San Antonio stretched wild and untamed in every direction, a landscape that could swallow a person whole if they did not know their way. But Caleb kept that lantern lit because he believed in his bones that someday, somehow, Emma Hartwell would see that light and find her way back to him. They had met 2 years earlier at a barn raising on the Henderson property, when Emma had arrived from Missouri with her widowed father, seeking a fresh start after her mother's death from consumption. Caleb had been 24 then, already establishing himself as a capable rancher with a small but profitable spread, and Emma had been 22, with honey-colored hair that caught the sunlight and eyes the color of spring grass. He had watched her across the yard that day, laughing with the other young women as they prepared the noon meal, and something in his chest had shifted permanently. Their courtship had been proper but intense, stolen moments between church services and community gatherings, long conversations during chaperoned walks where they discovered they shared the same dreams of building something lasting in this rough country. Emma had a quick mind and a generous heart, always bringing food to struggling families, always ready with a kind word for the ranch hands who worked her father's land. Caleb had fallen so completely in love with her that sometimes he forgot to breathe when she was near. He had proposed on a warm April evening beside the creek that ran through his property, getting down on one knee in the wildflowers while the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Emma had said yes with tears streaming down her face, and they had set a wedding date for October, giving them time to build an addition onto his ranch house and save money for their future together. But then cholera had swept through San Antonio that summer, devastating families and leaving terror in its wake. Emma's father had fallen ill in late July, and despite Emma's tireless nursing, he had died within 5 days. Grief-stricken and suddenly alone, Emma had received a letter from her aunt in St. Louis, her mother's sister, begging her to come live with her and help run a boarding house. The aunt was elderly and needed family, the letter said, and Emma would have security and comfort there. Caleb had held Emma as she wept over the decision. She loved him desperately, she said, but she felt torn by obligation to her only remaining family. Her aunt had no one else, and Emma felt she owed it to her mother's memory to help her sister in old age. They had argued, not with anger but with the passionate desperation of two people being torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. "Marry me now," Caleb had pleaded. "We will make it work here." "You do not owe your whole future to an aunt you have not seen in 10 years. She is family, Caleb," Emma had said, her voice breaking. "My mother would have wanted me to take care of her. I cannot just abandon her when she is alone and struggling. And what about us? What about abandoning what we have?" Emma had touched his face with trembling fingers. "I am not abandoning you. I need time to get her settled to make sure she is cared for. 6 months, maybe a year, then I will come back to you, I swear it." "Texas to Missouri is not a simple journey," Caleb had said, fear making his voice harsh. "Anything could happen. You could decide to stay, you could forget about me." "I could never forget you," Emma had whispered. "You are written on my heart, Caleb Thornton, I will come back." But Caleb had seen the uncertainty in her eyes, the pull of duty warring with love, and he had known that once she left, the distance and time might erode what they had built. He had tried one last time the day before her departure, riding to the hotel where she was staying before catching the stage. "I will keep a light burning for you," he had told her, holding both her hands in his. "Every single night I will put a lantern in the window of our home. No matter how long it takes, that light will be there, showing you the way back to me. When you are ready, when you have done what you need to do, you follow that light home." Emma had kissed him then with such fierce longing that he had tasted salt from both their tears. "I love you," she had said. "Remember that, no matter what happens." And then she had climbed onto the stagecoach, and Caleb had watched it roll away until it disappeared into the dusty horizon, taking his heart with it. The first months had been agony. Caleb had thrown himself into ranch work with almost frantic energy, expanding his herd, mending fences, breaking horses. Anything to exhaust himself so completely that he could sleep without dreaming of Emma. He hired 2 ranch hands, Miguel and Tom, who quickly became friends as well as employees. They never asked about the lantern that burned every night in the window, but Caleb knew they understood. Emma had written faithfully at first, long letters describing St. Louis, her aunt's boarding house, the struggle to make ends meet in the city. Her aunt's health was worse than Emma had realized, she wrote, and the boarding house was nearly bankrupt. Emma was working herself to exhaustion trying to save it, cooking and cleaning for the boarders, managing the finances, nursing her aunt through bad spells. Caleb had written back just as faithfully, describing the ranch, the cattle drives, how much he missed her, how the lantern burned every night without fail. He had begged her to come home, but he had tried to keep the desperation out of his words, not wanting to add to her burden of guilt. But gradually, over the following year, the letters had become less frequent. Emma's had grown shorter, more distracted, filled with mundane details, but lacking the passion and intimacy of her earlier correspondence. Caleb's had become more careful, as if they were writing to polite acquaintances rather than lovers who had promised themselves to each other. The last letter Caleb had received from Emma had arrived 8 months ago. It had been brief, apologetic, explaining that her aunt had suffered a stroke and required constant care. Emma sounded exhausted and defeated, and she had not mentioned coming back to Texas. She had not mentioned their future at all. Caleb had written back immediately, but no response had come. As the months stretched on with no word, Caleb had felt despair beginning to replace hope. His friends had gently suggested he move on, that Emma had clearly chosen a different life. Even Miguel's wife Rosa, a warm-hearted woman who had heard the whole story, had tried to introduce Caleb to eligible young women in town. But Caleb could not let go. Every night, he lit that lantern and placed it in the window, and every night he told himself that tomorrow might be the day Emma would return. Now it was March of 1878, spring arriving early with warm winds and bluebonnets coloring the hillsides. Caleb stood at his window as dusk settled over the land, lighting the lantern as he had done every night for nearly a year. The flame caught and steadied, casting its warm glow out into the gathering darkness. He set it carefully on the wide windowsill where it would be visible for miles across the flat Texas prairie. "You are a fool, amigo," Miguel said from the doorway, but his voice was gentle. "It has been too long." "I made her a promise," Caleb said, not turning around. "I told her I would keep this light burning. I am a man of my word." Miguel sighed and left him alone, and Caleb stood watching the night descend, wondering if Emma ever thought of him, if she ever remembered the cowboy who had loved her enough to wait. What Caleb did not know was that 800 miles north, Emma Hartwell was packing a small carpetbag with shaking hands, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. Her aunt had died 2 weeks earlier, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79, and Emma had spent the time since arranging the funeral, settling debts, and selling the boarding house. She was finally free of her obligations, and the only thought in her mind was getting back to Texas, getting back to Caleb. The guilt had eaten at her for months. She had allowed herself to become trapped in St. Louis, caught in the endless cycle of caring for her aunt, managing the boarding house, dealing with one crisis after another. She had told herself she would leave soon, but there had always been one more reason to stay, one more emergency that required her attention. The letters to Caleb had become harder to write as shame had joined her exhaustion. How could she explain that she was choosing duty over love day after day, week after week? Eventually, she had simply stopped writing, unable to bear the thought of making more empty promises. She had convinced herself that Caleb would move on, that he would find someone else, that it was better for him if she just disappeared from his life. The guilt of that decision had nearly crushed her, but she had been so tired, so overwhelmed, that she had not known what else to do. But now, with her aunt buried and her obligations finally discharged, Emma felt like she was waking from a long nightmare. She had sat alone in her small room above the boarding house the night after the sale was finalized and let herself remember Texas. Remember Caleb. Remember the way he had looked at her like she was his entire world, the gentleness of his hands, the warmth of his smile, the absolute certainty she had felt in his presence that she was exactly where she belonged. And she had remembered his promise, "I will keep a light burning for you every single night." Could he possibly still be waiting, after all this time with no word from her for 8 months? Emma barely dared to hope, but she had to try. She had to go back, even if only to apologize, to explain, to tell him face to face that leaving him had been the biggest mistake of her life. The journey south was long and grueling. Emma took the train as far as she could, then boarded a series of stagecoaches that rattled through Missouri, into Arkansas, and finally into Texas. She had enough money from the sale of the boarding house to travel comfortably, but comfort was the last thing on her mind. Every mile that brought her closer to San Antonio made her heart beat faster with a mixture of hope and terror. What if Caleb was married? What if he hated her for abandoning him? What if he had forgotten her entirely? The possibilities tormented Emma during the long, dusty hours on the road. She had been gone for almost 2 years. So much could have changed. But she had to know. She had to see him again, even if only to set herself free from the constant ache of missing him. The stagecoach reached San Antonio on a Thursday afternoon in late March. Emma felt like her skin was too tight for her body as she climbed down, her legs shaky from travel and nerves. The town looked both familiar and strange, as if she was seeing it through water. She checked into a small hotel, cleaned herself up as best she could, and tried to gather the courage for what came next. She would ride out to Caleb's ranch tomorrow, she decided. She would see if the light was still burning, and then she would know. But Emma found she could not wait. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, she felt pulled by an invisible thread. She borrowed a horse from the hotel stable, ignoring the stableman's protests that a lady should not be riding out alone so late. Emma did not care about propriety anymore. She had spent nearly 2 years being sensible and dutiful, and it had cost her everything that mattered. She rode out of town toward Caleb's ranch, her memory guiding her even though darkness was falling fast. The road was rough and her borrowed horse was unfamiliar, but Emma pushed forward, driven by a desperation she could not name. She had to know. She had to see. As full darkness descended, Emma began to doubt herself. She was not entirely certain she remembered the way, and the landscape looked different than it had 2 years ago. She slowed her horse, peering through the gloom, trying to orient herself by the stars beginning to emerge overhead. And then she saw it. A small point of light in the distance, warm and steady against the black expanse of prairie. A light shining from a window, miles away but unmistakable. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It could be any ranch house, any homesteader's cabin, but something deep in her soul recognized it, knew it with absolute certainty. That was Caleb's light. That was the beacon he had promised to keep burning for her. He had waited. After all this time, all her silence, all her failures, Caleb had kept his promise. Emma urged her horse into a gallop, tears streaming down her face as she rode toward that distant light. The wind whipped her hair loose from its pins and stung her cheeks, but she did not slow down. She kept her eyes fixed on that golden glow, letting it guide her across the dark prairie like a star leading travelers home. As she drew closer, she could make out the shape of the ranch house, larger than she remembered. Caleb must have added on to it. The barn and outbuildings looked well-maintained, and she could see cattle in the distance. He had clearly prospered in the time she had been gone. Emma reined in her horse in front of the house, her heart hammering so violently she felt sick. The lantern glowed in the front window, its light spilling out onto the porch. For a long moment, she just sat there, frozen by equal parts hope and fear. Then the front door opened, and Caleb stepped out onto the porch. Even in the dim light, Emma could see that the years had changed him. He looked older, more weathered, with new lines around his eyes and a hardness to his jaw that had not been there before. He was holding a rifle, clearly having heard the approach of a rider, and he peered out into the darkness with caution. "Who is there?" he called, his voice deeper than Emma remembered, rougher. Emma tried to speak, but her throat had closed up. She dismounted on shaking legs, holding onto the saddle for support. "I said, who is there?" Caleb repeated, raising the rifle slightly. "Caleb," Emma managed, her voice cracking. "It is me. It is Emma." The rifle lowered slowly. Caleb took a step forward, then another, moving down off the porch like a man in a dream. In the light spilling from the window, Emma could see his face clearly now, could see the shock and disbelief written across his features. "Emma," he whispered, "is that really you?" "Yes," Emma said, and then she was crying in earnest, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "I am sorry. I am so sorry, Caleb. I should have come back sooner. I should have written. I should have never left in the first place." Caleb crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. Emma collapsed against his chest, feeling his solid warmth, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and soap and something uniquely Caleb. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt him shaking. "You came back," he said into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "I kept the light burning. Every night, just like I promised. I did not know if you would ever see it, but I kept it burning." "I saw it," Emma sobbed. "I rode out tonight because I could not wait, and I saw your light in the darkness. I followed it home to you." Caleb pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. In the lamplight, Emma could see that his own eyes were wet. "I thought you were gone forever," he said. "When the letters stopped, I thought I had lost you." "You did not lose me," Emma said fiercely. "I lost myself for a while. I got trapped in obligation and guilt, and I let fear keep me away. But I never stopped loving you, Caleb. Not for a single day." "I never stopped loving you either," Caleb said, and then he was kissing her, and Emma felt like she could finally breathe again after drowning for 2 years. The kiss was desperate and tender, and full of all the longing and pain of their separation. Emma kissed him back with everything she had, trying to pour 2 years of regret and love and apology into the press of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Come inside," he said. "We have a lot to talk about." Emma let him lead her into the house, her hand gripped tightly in his as if he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. Inside, she looked around at what had clearly become a real home. The main room was larger than before, with comfortable furniture and curtains on the windows and books on a shelf. It was neat but lived in, a bachelor's space but not an unhappy one. Caleb settled her into a chair by the fireplace and built up the fire, then pulled another chair close so he could sit facing her. For a long moment they just looked at each other, taking in the changes that time had wrought. "You look tired," Caleb said finally, reaching out to touch her face gently. "Worn down." "I was," Emma admitted. Taking care of my aunt, running the boarding house, it consumed everything. I let it consume me, and that was my own fault. I could have left sooner. I should have left sooner. Tell me what happened, Caleb said. Tell me everything. So Emma did. She told him about arriving in St. Louis to find her aunt in worse health than expected, about the boarding house teetering on the edge of financial ruin, about the endless work of trying to keep it afloat while nursing her aunt through repeated illnesses. She told him about the guilt that had paralyzed her, the feeling that she owed it to her mother's memory to take care of her aunt, no matter the personal cost. She told him about the exhaustion that had made everything seem hopeless, about how the letters had gotten harder and harder to write until she had simply stopped trying. I convinced myself you would be better off without me, Emma said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I thought you would move on and find someone who could actually be there for you, instead of someone who kept making promises she could not keep. I thought it was kinder to just let you go. That was not your choice to make, Caleb said, but his voice was gentle, not angry. I would have waited forever, Emma. I was waiting forever. Every night I lit that lantern and told myself you were worth waiting for. I do not deserve you, Emma whispered. That is not for you to decide either, Caleb said. He squeezed her hands. I am not going to pretend the last 2 years were easy. I was hurt when the letters stopped. I thought you had decided to build a life in St. Louis and did not have the courage to tell me directly. I was angry and sad, and I came very close to giving up more times than I can count. I would not have blamed you if you had, Emma said, but I did not, Caleb continued. Because I know what we have. I know what I felt when I was with you, and I know that kind of love does not come along twice in a lifetime. So I kept waiting, and I kept hoping, and I kept that damned lantern burning even when everyone told me I was a fool. Emma let out a laugh that was half sob. You are a fool, the best kind of fool. Caleb smiled, and Emma saw some of the hardness leave his face, revealing the man she had fallen in love with underneath the weathered exterior. Your aunt, he asked gently. You said was taking care of her. She passed 2 weeks ago, Emma said, peacefully in her sleep. I sold the boarding house and came straight here. I could not stay away anymore, Caleb. Even if you did not want me, even if you had married someone else, I had to come back. I had to tell you that you were right, that I should have married you when you asked, that leaving you was the biggest mistake I have ever made. I am not married, Caleb said. There has been no one else. How could there be when you still owned my heart? Emma leaned forward and kissed him again, softer this time, full of tenderness and gratitude. When she pulled back, Caleb was smiling. So what now? Emma asked. I came back, but I have no right to expect anything from you. I hurt you terribly. I understand if you need time, if you need to think about whether you can trust me again. Emma, Caleb said, standing up and pulling her to her feet with him, I have had 2 years to think. I know exactly what I want. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. When he opened it, Emma saw a silver ring with a small diamond, the ring he had given her when he proposed 2 years ago, the ring she had returned to him before leaving for St. Louis. I kept this too, Caleb said, along with the lantern, both of them waiting for you to come home. He got down on one knee, just as he had beside the creek that April evening so long ago. Emma Hartwell, will you marry me? Will you stay here with me and build the life we always dreamed of? I do not need time and I do not need to think. I just need you. Emma was crying again, but this time they were tears of pure joy. Yes, she said. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes, I will marry you, Caleb Thornton, and I will never leave you again. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both laughing. When he set her down, Emma felt lighter than she had in 2 years, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When? Caleb asked. When will you marry me? Tomorrow, Emma said recklessly. Today, right now, I do not want to wait any more, Caleb laughed. Give me at least a few days to arrange things properly. I want to do this right. I want the whole town there to witness me marrying the woman I love." They settled on the following Saturday, giving them just over a week to prepare. Caleb would not let Emma stay at his ranch unchaperoned before the wedding, despite her protests, so he rode her back to town that night and got her settled at the hotel. Before he left, he kissed her one more time in the shadows of the stable. "I will see you tomorrow," he promised, "and every day after that for the rest of our lives." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Emma met Miguel and Tom and Rosa, all of whom welcomed her with warmth and obvious relief that Caleb's long wait had finally ended. Rosa helped Emma find a dress, a beautiful cream-colored gown with lace at the collar and cuffs. Caleb arranged for the ceremony at the little church in town, and word spread quickly through the community that the Thornton wedding was finally happening. Emma learned that Caleb had become something of a legend in the area, the faithful cowboy who kept a lantern burning every night for his lost love. People had thought he was crazy, but now they were charmed by the romance of it all. Several women approached Emma to tell her how lucky she was, and Emma agreed wholeheartedly. She and Caleb spent as much time together as propriety allowed, taking long walks, having long conversations, relearning each other. Emma told him more about her time in St. Louis, about the lonely nights when she had cried herself to sleep thinking of him, about the moment she had decided to come back. Caleb told her about building up the ranch, about the cattle drives and the hard winters, about the nights when he had stared at that lantern, and wondered if he was wasting his life waiting for a ghost. "I was never a ghost," Emma said, squeezing his hand. "I was just lost for a while." "But you found your way home," Caleb said. "That is all that matters." Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm and sunny with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. Emma dressed with Rosa's help, her hands shaking as the older woman fixed her hair and adjusted her veil. Looking at herself in the mirror, Emma saw that the exhaustion that had haunted her features for so long had faded. She looked happy, hopeful, alive in a way she had not been since before she left Texas. The church was packed when Emma arrived. It seemed like half of San Antonio had turned out for the wedding, eager to witness the end of the most romantic story the town had seen in years. But Emma only had eyes for Caleb, standing at the front of the church in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face glowing with such joy that Emma felt her heart might burst. She walked down the aisle alone, having no father to give her away, but she did not feel alone. She felt Caleb's love reaching out to her with every step, felt the rightness of this moment settling into her bones. When she reached him and took his hands, she saw tears on his cheeks and her own vision blurred. The ceremony passed in a happy haze. Emma said her vows with a steady voice, promising to love and honor Caleb for the rest of her days, and she meant every word with her whole heart. When Caleb promised the same, his voice was thick with emotion, and Emma knew he meant it just as deeply. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her so thoroughly that the congregation burst into applause and laughter. Emma kissed him back, feeling like she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The reception afterward was a joyous affair, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Emma danced with Caleb again and again, neither of them able to stop smiling. Friends and neighbors offered their congratulations and well wishes, and Emma felt embraced by the community in a way she had never experienced in St. Louis. As the sun began to set, Caleb whisked Emma away from the celebration, lifting her onto his horse and climbing up behind her. They rode back to the ranch together, Emma leaning back against her husband's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his back. When they arrived home, Emma saw that the lantern was not lit in the window. For a moment, she felt a pang of loss, missing that beacon that had guided her back to him. But then Caleb helped her down and pulled her close. "I do not need to light it anymore," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "You are home now. You are here with me where you belong." "The waiting is over." Emma smiled up at him, her husband, her love, her home. "The waiting is over," she agreed. "Now the living begins." Caleb carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and Emma looked around at the house that was now truly theirs. It was full of possibility, full of love, full of the future they would build together. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Emma felt peace settle over her for the first time in years. She was where she was meant to be, with the man she was meant to be with, and nothing would ever separate them again. "I love you," she whispered into the quiet. "I love you too," Caleb whispered back, pulling her closer. "Always have, always will." And in the morning, when Emma woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, she saw that Caleb was already awake, watching her with such tenderness in his eyes that she felt tears prick her own. "Good morning, Mrs. Thornton," he said, and Emma's heart swelled with joy. "Good morning, Mr. Thornton," she replied, and kissed him as the Texas sun rose on their first full day as husband and wife. The first months of their marriage were blissful. Emma threw herself into making the ranch house a true home, sewing curtains and planting a garden and learning to cook the meals Caleb loved. She befriended Rosa and the other ranch wives in the area, finding a community of strong women who had made lives for themselves in this harsh but beautiful land. She helped Caleb with the ranch work too, proving herself capable of riding and roping and managing the books. Caleb had never been happier. Having Emma beside him, waking up to her every morning, falling asleep with her in his arms every night, it was everything he had dreamed of during those long months of waiting. He loved watching her move through their home, loved hearing her laughter, loved the way she fit so perfectly into his life and his heart. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, making up for lost time. They rode out across the ranch together, and Caleb showed Emma every corner of the property, sharing his dreams for expansion and improvement. Emma shared her own ideas, and Caleb was impressed by her sharp mind for business and her practical suggestions. "We make a good team," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "The best team," Emma agreed, lacing her fingers through his. As summer arrived, bringing intense heat and long days of hard work, Emma discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb one night after supper, nervous about his reaction, but he had let out a whoop of joy and picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "We are going to be parents," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "You are going to make me a father." "In about 7 months, if I have calculated correctly," Emma said, laughing at his enthusiasm. Caleb immediately became protective, insisting Emma rest more, trying to take over all the heavy chores. Emma had to argue with him to let her continue her normal activities, reminding him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time and that she was strong and healthy. "I just want to take care of you," Caleb said. "I spent so long without you, I cannot bear the thought of anything happening to you now." "Nothing is going to happen to me," Emma assured him. "I am going to have this baby, and we are going to raise him or her together, and we are going to be happy." And they were happy, deliriously so. Emma's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the heat of the Texas summer. Rosa and the other ranch wives rallied around her, offering advice and help and hand-me-down baby clothes. Caleb built a beautiful wooden cradle in the evenings, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, painting it with careful precision. Their son was born in February of 1879, arriving during a cold snap that had everyone huddled around fires. The labor was long and difficult, and Caleb paced outside the bedroom where Rosa and the midwife attended Emma, nearly wearing a hole in the floor. But when he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and healthy, he nearly collapsed with relief. Rosa emerged with a smile. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife is fine, tired but fine." Caleb rushed into the bedroom to find Emma propped up on pillows, sweaty and exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with such love and pride that Caleb felt his throat tighten. "Meet your son," Emma said softly. Caleb sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the small red face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. As Caleb watched, the baby opened his eyes, revealing them to be blue-gray, and seemed to look right at him. "He is perfect," Caleb whispered. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Emma corrected. "He is ours, Caleb, our family." They named him James after Caleb's father, and he was a joy from the start. Caleb proved to be a devoted father, getting up with Emma for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and marveling at him. Emma watched her husband with their baby and fell even more deeply in love with him, if that was possible. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Caleb made smart decisions about the cattle business, expanding the herd and improving the breeding stock. Emma proved to have a talent for managing money, and she kept their accounts meticulously, finding ways to save and invest that increased their security. They hired more hands to help with the growing operation, building a bunkhouse for them and treating them fairly, so they had a reputation for being good employers. The lantern that had burned for so many nights stayed in the window, but now it was just a decoration, a reminder of the love that had brought them together. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Emma would look at it and remember that desperate ride through the darkness, following the light home. She would feel grateful all over again for Caleb's faithfulness, for his refusal to give up on her even when she had given up on herself. 2 years after James was born, Emma gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's gray eyes, and she was a placid, happy baby who rarely cried. James adored his little sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Caleb joked that they were going to have to beat the boys off with sticks when she got older. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. There were challenges, of course. A drought one year that tested their resources and forced them to make hard decisions about the herd. A winter so harsh that they lost several cattle and had to work around the clock to keep the rest alive. A bout of influenza that swept through the household, leaving everyone weak and miserable for weeks. But through it all, Caleb and Emma faced everything together, their love deepening with every challenge overcome. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses, learned how to fight fair and make up thoroughly, learned how to be partners in the truest sense of the word. Emma never regretted her decision to return to Texas. The guilt she had carried for so long faded as she built a life full of purpose and love. She threw herself into community activities, helping to start a school in town, organizing charitable efforts for struggling families, becoming known as a woman of compassion and capability. Caleb watched his wife bloom into the woman she was always meant to be, and he felt proud and grateful every single day. He had waited for her, yes, but she had been worth every moment of that wait. Their life together was richer and more fulfilling than he had ever imagined possible. When James was 5 and Sarah was 3, Emma discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, and Emma was sick and exhausted through much of it. Caleb hovered anxiously, remembering his terror during James's birth, but Emma assured him she was fine, just tired. Their third child, a son they named Thomas, was born in the spring of 1884, 6 years after Emma had ridden through the darkness toward Caleb's light. He was a big baby, healthy and strong, and the birth went smoothly despite Emma's difficult pregnancy. Caleb held his new son and looked at Emma, still beautiful despite the gray beginning to thread through her hair, and felt his love for her swell so large he thought his chest might burst. "3," he said. "We have 3 children, Emma. We have built a family." "The family we always dreamed of," Emma said, smiling tiredly, "the life we were always meant to have." As Thomas grew, joining his older siblings in the chaos and joy of childhood, Caleb and Emma settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage. They could communicate with just a look, could anticipate each other's needs, could work together with the ease of long practice. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other hello and goodbye, still told each other, "I love you," every single day. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the area. Caleb was respected in the community as a fair and honorable man, and Emma was beloved for her kindness and generosity. Their children grew healthy and happy, learning the value of hard work and the importance of family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Emma back to the creek where he had first proposed. It was a warm spring day, much like the day he had gotten down on one knee among the wildflowers. They sat on a blanket and watched the water flow past, holding hands and talking quietly. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "The years we lost. The time we could have had together if you had not gone to St. Louis." Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I regret the pain I caused you," she said finally. "I regret the time we spent apart, the letters I did not write, the doubt I let creep in, but I do not regret the journey that brought me here. I think maybe I needed to go away to understand how much I needed you. I needed to learn that duty without love is just a cage, and that real love is worth fighting for, worth riding through the darkness for." Caleb raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You followed my light home," he said. "That is all that matters. You came back to me." "I will always come back to you," Emma said. "No matter what, no matter where, I will always find my way home to you." They kissed there beside the creek, surrounded by wildflowers, and Emma felt the same certainty she had felt the first time Caleb proposed. This was right. This was where she belonged. This was home. As the years continued to pass, Caleb and Emma grew older together, their hair silvering, their faces gaining the lines and weathering of a life lived fully. They faced the losses that come with age, friends passing, parents dying, the inevitable sorrows of a long life. But they faced it all together, drawing strength from each other. James grew into a responsible young man who loved ranching and wanted to take over the family business someday. Sarah became a skilled horsewoman and a talented artist, filling the house with her drawings and paintings. Thomas showed a scholarly bent, always reading, talking about maybe becoming a teacher or a lawyer. Caleb and Emma watched their children grow with pride and occasional nostalgia for the days when they had been small enough to scoop up and hold. But they were excited for the future too, for the people their children were becoming, for the grandchildren they hoped would come someday. On a warm evening in the summer of 1888, 10 years after Emma had followed the lantern light home, Caleb and Emma sat on their porch watching the sunset. The children were inside doing their evening chores, and for a moment it was just the two of them, like it had been in the beginning. "Do you remember the night you came back?" Caleb asked, his arm around Emma's shoulders, riding up out of the darkness. "I remember every detail," Emma said, "the way my heart was pounding, the terror that you would not want me anymore. And then seeing that light, your light, and knowing you had waited." "I would have waited forever," Caleb said. "I know," Emma said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That is why I love you. That is why I will always love you." Inside the house, the old lantern sat on a shelf, no longer needed but carefully preserved. Sometimes Emma would dust it and remember, would let herself feel again the wonder of that night when she had followed its light home to the man she loved. It had guided her through the darkness to this life, this love, this family. And every night, even though the lantern no longer burned in the window, Caleb and Emma still found their way to each other, still held each other close. Still knew, with absolute certainty, that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The years continued to unfold with all their joys and sorrows, but through it all, Caleb and Emma remained steadfast. Their love, tested by separation and doubt, had emerged stronger and deeper than ever. They had found their way to each other through darkness and uncertainty, and nothing would ever shake the foundation they had built. James eventually married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and Caleb and Emma became grandparents, delighting in the babies their son and daughter-in-law brought into the world. Sarah married a banker from San Antonio, surprising everyone but proving that love could be found in unexpected places. Thomas went off to university, but he came home often, drawn by the ties of family and the land he had grown up loving. As Caleb and Emma entered their 60s, slowing down but still active, still managing the ranch with the help of their sons, they would sometimes sit together in the evenings and reflect on their journey. From that first meeting at the barn raising through the pain of separation, to Emma's desperate ride toward the lantern light, to the full and beautiful life they had built together. "I kept my promise," Caleb would say sometimes, and Emma would smile. "You did," she would reply. "You kept the light burning and I found my way home." And then they would sit in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. The lantern might no longer burn in the window, but the light of their love illuminated everything around them, a beacon of hope and faithfulness that had guided them through darkness into joy. Their story became a legend in the area, told and retold, a reminder that true love is patient, that faithfulness is rewarded, that sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we are meant to be. And every time someone told the tale of the cowboy who kept a lantern burning every night for his lost love, and the woman who finally followed that light home to him, listeners would sigh with satisfaction at the happy ending. Because Emma and Caleb did get their happy ending. They grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, secure in their love and the life they had built. They faced the future without fear, knowing that whatever came, they would face it together. The waiting was over. The searching was done. They had found each other, lost each other, and found their way back again, and nothing would ever separate them again. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered across the Texas prairie, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of rain, Emma would sometimes stand at the window where the lantern used to burn and look out at the darkness. She would remember that desperate ride, remember the hope and fear that had driven her, remember the moment she had seen Caleb's light shining like a star. Then Caleb would come up behind her and wrap his arms around her waist, and Emma would lean back into his embrace, and they would stand there together. Two people who had found their way home to each other against all odds. The lantern no longer needed to burn because they had each other, and that was light enough for any darkness, warmth enough for any cold night, home enough for any wanderer. Their love story, born in the wild Texas country of 1876 and tested by separation and doubt, had endured and flourished into something beautiful and lasting. From that first lantern lit in hope to the comfortable companionship of their later years, Caleb and Emma had proven that true love could overcome any obstacle, span any distance, survive any separation. And when, many years later, their great-grandchildren would ask about the old lantern on the shelf, about why it was kept so carefully preserved, Caleb and Emma would smile at each other and tell the story one more time. The story of a promise kept, a light followed, a love that had burned steady and true through darkness and doubt, until it guided two hearts home to each other, where they belonged, where they had always belonged, forever and always.